Heyo, this is Trevor giving a little impromptu presentation for Project One. I decided to do my surveys and my data on movies. So shared with you is going to be multiple things. First off is going to be my old Excel sheet. This is just going to be my raw data. Second off is going to be my new Excel sheet with my interpreted data and my graphs and such. Third off is going to be the download version of this Google Slides as a Microsoft PowerPoint, alongside in the comments just the link to access this presentation in its original form on Google. And then fourthly, a PDF of the rubric that I have here at home. Anyways, let's just get into it. So, why did I choose film? I've always had an interest in movies. I love movies. Even from a young age, it's been one of, if not my favorite activities, and there's something special about it that I don't really think can be replicated. So, who's the population in the sample? With my love for film and all its intricacies, as I've grown older, I found others who feel the same way on the internet. So, my population here comes from Discord users. Discord is basically a social media site with user-created servers where people can go and chat about whatever they like. So the data being observed was pulled from those who love film and go out of their way to engage with it as much as possible on these Discord servers. Those in these servers are mostly men between the ages of 16 and 24, but there are also women. So our sample is Discord users I know personally and share film server space with. So how is the data collected? Using an open link from Google Sheets, I created my little survey. I sent that out into 4 different Discord servers. I let everyone in the servers know what the link was, why it was there, and what I needed it for. There are many different ways to decide what kind of sampling took place in this case. I interpreted it as cluster sampling, but it could also be... So it can also kind of be considered stratified sampling, but I consider cluster sampling. So if you look at my little chart down here, here's our population, which is Discord cinephiles, all the people on Discord who engage with movies. I split them up into clusters, or the clusters were already split up into people who are part of specific movie servers already about movies. And then highlighted in green here is going to be... the servers that I'm also a part of that I pulled the data from. So, what are my questions asked? So, first for my quantitative questions, I asked how many movies do you watch a week? How often do you see movies in theaters in a month? How many streaming platforms do you use to watch movies? And then for my qualitative questions, I asked, what's your favorite genre? What do you like most about movies? And what are your favorite days and times of day to watch movies? Noteworthy here, for my qualitative questions, interviewees were given a selection of basic answers to these, and they were able to choose as many basic answers as they'd like. So I just had them check off on my survey. But there was also a free response box at the bottom for these qualitative questions. And then my additional questions were, what's your favorite and least favorite movie? So did any bias take place? For sure. With only 32 respondents, and one of them being from me, there was definite undercoverage. By only receiving data from those I shared servers with, there was sampling bias. Only those who wanted or volunteered to take the survey gave out data. So, I wasn't pulling from absolutely everybody, only those who wanted to engage. Even with the inclusion of a free response option under more than half of my questions, there could be response bias, as some people think that it's not really intended for them to give free response and that they should choose one of the responses that I said that they can give. Being that this survey was presented in a casual manner, there could be some joking or untrue responses from those who didn't take it seriously, and I definitely got some responses like this leading to some response error. Some free response data had to be removed or deleted just because it was blatantly, intentionally untrue, or just offensive for the sake of shock value. So I took these intentional pieces of outlier data out if they were blatantly, pieces of outlier data for the sake of it. This is also response error. So a few big things before we get into the slides about the questions, show you my data and the graphs. The questions in the data were not set up to where a mean is easily achievable or applicable. Nevertheless, I still included my mean for all my data in my Excel sheet. If you look in there, you'll find out why my mean doesn't really mean anything. I set the survey up weird. So with a small response size and numbers, there are going to be some overlapping statistical values. By this I mean, quartile 3 is also, my maximum. So all the data is on the same graph. All the data is on the same graph with the data being looked at displayed with numbers next to it. I'll show you what I mean when we go into the graphs, but I just did this to make it more comprehensive during the summary. The data was placed on a scatter plot as to make the highlighted values easier to see, as well as I couldn't get the histograms to work. I couldn't get the bar graphs to work for my numerical questions. Even if I put them in a frequency distribution, I don't know, it's odd. Excel is really weird. Not all these graphs are going to look the same. They all have the same data on them, but they don't exactly look the same, but they still express the same idea. R values and resolutions are not consistent in the carryover to Google products. So as I took from Excel and put it onto my Google PowerPoint here, things changed a little bit. The data didn't change. It might just look a little wonky. I also couldn't find a way to display my X values at the bottom of my graphs. You'll see why. This seems like a very small issue, but I just couldn't figure it out. And you'll see why I had issues with it when we get into the graphs. So I'll clarify on important pieces of data. None of my correlation coefficients or my R values were displayed in negatives, so I just touched on that a little bit. And for the last 3 questions, my qualitative questions, like I said earlier, interviewees were able to check off multiple responses. And for number 8, not all the data is included here on this slideshow. By all the data, I mean things like variance, standard deviation. All that stuff is going to be on my Excel sheet. With that in mind, let's look at my data and my graphs. So for our first question here, how many movies do you watch a week? If you look over here at this box and whisker plot, you can see that it has a very normal distribution. But some odd things are the median, quartile 2 and quartile 3 are under the same value, which right here is 4.5. Looking down here at my scatter plot, you can see that it's generally trending downward, and that my R value is relatively low. So my data isn't very consistent with the linear trend line here. The highest number of people overall, if you can see over here on my pie chart, even though I don't have percentages in here, watch 2 movies a week. About 2 movies a week. How often do you see movies in theaters in a month? So if you look over here at my box plot here, we're more skewed to the right, but it's also very normal. Quartile 3 is also our maximum here. Our R value is pretty high, but it is sloping downward, so it has a negative correlation. but it is relatively close to our data on my trend line. And the highest number of people go to watch 0 or 1 movies in theaters in a month, which is pretty surprising for these cinephiles. How many streaming platforms do you use to watch movies? So, if you look down here at the bottom right at my box plot, you can see that it is definitely skewed right. It's skewed toward the higher values. So more of my data is in the lower values. So my R value here is 0.3, but it does have a positive correlation unlike the other two questions. But you can see that it's not really consistent with the trend line here. And looking at my pie chart over here, the highest number of people use more than 5 streaming services to watch movies. So the way that I had this arranged is on my questionnaire was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 5 plus. The reason I'm not able to display these X values down here on these individual lines is because 5 plus isn't considered a value. So I don't know, it's kind of weird. Excel's a little wonky. So getting into my qualitative questions here. This is what's your favorite genre? A little under 2/3 of people said horror was one of their favorites, so that ended up being the most liked genre out of all of these. Closely above comedies. Science fiction, comedy, and horror were the top 3. Romance, documentary, and musicals were the lowest 3, with musicals being relatively far below the others. Moving on. What do you like most about movies? So, story, down here at the bottom, was the most appreciated or liked thing about film. Editing, here at the very, very bottom, very few said they liked editing. Only 2. Was an outlier piece of data, for sure. And what I believe to be a major respect for the logos, the real nitty-gritty science of film, here, acting was the second lowest. So for these people, these cinephiles, I assume after looking at this data that just because the movie has Tom Cruise in it doesn't mean that they're a fan. So what are your favorite days and times of the day to watch movies? Majority of people said that they like to watch movies in the evening on weekends. But one thing that's really surprising to me is absolutely nobody said they like to watch movies in the morning. I got no responses for people enjoying to watch movies in the morning. So getting to my additional questions here, pulled straight from my Excel sheet on the left, you can see all my responses for what's your favorite movie, and on the right here, what's your least favorite or the worst movie you've ever seen. These questions weren't really required for the project. I just decided to grab the data because I personally found these questions to be very interesting and I wanted to see what people would respond with. Maybe get some recommendations or learn what to stay away from. But there definitely are some things of note, which is why I decided to include it in the presentation here. 2 people in What's the Worst Movie You've Ever Seen listed DreamWorks Trolls as their least favorite movie, which is definitely interesting. One person over here in What's Your Favorite Movie said that Rocky Horror Picture Show from the 70s was their favorite movie, but one person over here in What's the Worst Movie You've Ever Seen said that it was their least favorite movie. So that's an interesting piece of data there. A lot of the films in the least favorite movies over here are superhero movies. For example, you have Black Widow right there, Dragon Ball. You could even consider Star Wars a part of that, or even Spider-Man or Thor down there. And a lot of these movies are favorite or least favorite are from the last 5 to 10 years of cinema. I see this as a representation of the age group being surveyed here, 16 to 24, and that a lot of these newer films are new in these people's memory. So they decided to write them here. So going into my conclusion and my final thoughts here, next time I collect data, I will think ahead about how I will display, interpret, and manipulate my data more. This is in reference to how my mean wasn't really very applicable here, just because I set my questions up oddly. And my information was relatively hard to interpret, at least for me. I also want to include less bias and not have to respond to my own survey to get to the necessary 30 responses. There was a lot of surprising data. There was some duplicates in free response questions, which was very interesting, considering that these weren't entirely anonymous and weren't taken in groups where the people were social. Nobody prefers to watch movies in the morning, and very few care about editing. So that was some surprising data. What I think I did well overall was I provided the opportunity to respond with multiple responses on the same question. For example, on my question where I asked, what's your favorite aspect of films? People were able to select the story and the visuals. Alongside that, I didn't have any neutral responses. People always had to pick sides. People always had to pick a piece of data that they wanted to align themselves with. Often I find that if you give people a neutral option, that's generally the one picked the most, as it doesn't require them to think. So this made for more accurate and interesting data, and I'm glad I did this project. I learned a lot about displaying, interpreting, and collecting data. So leaving off here with my one source on cluster sampling. Thanks for watching. See ya.